Hlas from the Gazette here. I am the sports columnist / Iowa men's basketball beat writer, and I'm joined by Nathan Ford of the Gazette, a basketball aficionado, producer of this and all other sports podcasts at the Gazette, and a pretty knowledgeable guy in general. We got a lot to talk about, so I thought it would be a good time to have an all-purpose podcast with what's gone on the last 5-6 days. College basketball in Iowa, both men and women. I don't know who we should open with. I'm tempted to say the Iowa State men and women because they're still standing, but we are in Cedar Rapids. So let's have postmortems for Iowa.
That sounds good to me. We'll probably be talking about Iowa State for a few more days at least. Like you said, they're still around. So Iowa, it's come to a sudden conclusion for both teams that I don't think anybody really saw coming.
No, it was as dismal a daily double, although it was 2 days apart, as anything I can remember. I mean, I didn't think that the men were a lock for the Sweet 16. No. Certainly, I thought they had a decent chance, but I thought the women were, 98%. It turns out that the other 2% had something to say about it.
Yeah, I thought for sure the women would advance. I mean, just the way they've been playing really since, early February, mid-February. The home court advantage that is such an advantage in the women's basketball tournament, multiplied by 5 or 10 with Iowa this year and the sellout crowds. Just having the type of experienced players that they have and just the role that they've been on. I don't think anybody saw it coming here in Iowa or nationally. And it was just, it was one of those games that I think we saw around December or early January. They had a couple of clunkers and they dealt with some injuries and a couple of off games from Caitlin. And that's just, it happened again. Not great shooting. And Clark just was not able to get into a rhythm in the second half, and bad rebounding. And it all came crashing down.
What a dismal thing. I mean, you have an ABC 2-hour slot, Iowa women's basketball, not even a Final Four game, a round of 32 game. This is what the nation thinks of Caitlin Clark.
Mm-hmm.
ABC was happy to put her on, for 2 hours. And that's sports, I guess, is you can't count on anybody or anything every time. But we're going to get to Iowa State and the teams that have good stories to tell right now. But the women, does Clark have enough to work with to be on a Final Four team?
I always thought this year that I thought the Final Four hype was maybe a little much. Now, of course, it's the NCAA tournament and it's a single elimination event, and if things fell their way, they could have made the Final Four. But I wouldn't have predicted it coming into the tournament and with their region as well, being in South Carolina's region. I mean, they're holding teams to like 30 points a game in the first 2 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, all season they did have some injuries at the start of the season that I was concerned with Goodman, the backup center, going down. And I was surprised that O'Grady really stepped up late in the season and became a reliable option off the bench. But still, I mean, they have good shooters around Clark, Marshall and Warnock. And then Taiwo coming off the bench is a pretty good shooter as well. But I think all along it hasn't been a great defensive team, hasn't been a great rebounding team. And when the shots aren't falling, which they weren't against Creighton, and Clark isn't able to get to the free throw line or score inside, then they lack options. And I'm excited to see what next year brings with some of the freshmen they have coming in. Hannah Stolke from Cedar Rapids, Washington, I think is a really versatile player. And she could provide an interesting option to go along with Sonano. But yeah, I mean, beyond Clark and Sonano, I don't know. I'm not sure that was a Final Four team, but it was a really, really good one, and a team that if it had been hot, could have gotten that far, but maybe wasn't likely to.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how views change. I mean, you win a regular season Big Ten title or a share of it, you win the tournament. If before the season somebody says you get that and everything else you're on your own, you'll say, I'll take it.
Oh, yeah.
But when you end with the loss, as the cliche goes, everybody but one team does, it really darkens everything, temporarily at least, and especially when it's a round of 32 game at home against a team you know that you should beat. I mean, I don't see Creighton giving Iowa State a tight game in Greensboro. I could be completely wrong, but I mean, the way that game started, I watched it on television. The first quarter, it's like, this is a game Iowa wants. This is racehorse basketball. And even though that's what Creighton does, and Creighton shoots threes, it just felt like the longer this game goes, the more and more it's going to favor Iowa. And then it just dried up, and the spigot never opened again. And so it did remind me of the men's game. I think they got tighter and tighter. And the burden of expectations can sometimes be too much.
Yeah, and then it was just weird to watch because they've had first halves like that in big games. I mean, they were down double digits against Indiana at home, against Michigan at home, Big Ten titles on the line, and came back and would go on like 20-4 runs and just pummel teams with their offense. And the shots didn't fall. And like you said, they got tighter and started to lack options. I thought Sonano was really good, but I mean, by her standards, she had a tough second half. A couple of shots inside weren't falling, and they kind of ran out of answers. And it was interesting too to hear Lisa Bluter in the post-game press conference address the officiating head on. Wasn't even asked about it. It was just part of her opening statement. Was just really unhappy with the game, with the way the game was called. And I don't listen to all of her post-game press conferences, but that struck me as something that she doesn't usually do. I mean, all coaches are going to talk to the refs throughout the game, but even in this one, I thought she was a little more adamant about stuff not getting called. And I'm never one to be like criticizing the officiating. I mean, as if that's why you lost the game. There was plenty of reasons why Iowa didn't lose that game, or why Iowa did lose that game. But I just thought it was interesting, and kind of goes to that lack of options, maybe, where the shots weren't falling and they couldn't get to the free throw line. And all that frustration just compounded in the second half. And they gave up a late lead still. I mean, they were up by 4 with a minute left and couldn't close it out.
And how, I don't know if you'd call it Shakespearean, that's going overboard, but for a player who left for more playing time to come in and get that playing time and beat them, Lauren Jensen, I know that everybody said they were happy for her, but how happy could you really be?
Yeah, and I know the guard rotation is deep at Iowa, but I was watching her score 9 points in a row at the end and thinking, Iowa probably could have found some playing time for her this year. But yeah, all the credit to her. It was one of those stories coming into the game where you're like, okay, she's a transfer. Of course, people are going to be talking about this, but is it really going to have that big of an impact? And the way that it played out. I mean, I had friends texting me who aren't Iowa fans, don't really watch Iowa at all. Like, did I hear that a player transferred out of Iowa and scored the game when that was a story that I think nationally resonated, not just because of Iowa losing, but the way that it happened is just, it was unbelievable to watch.
And you mentioned I can never pronounce her name right the first try. I'm so sorry to her. Sonano. Did I get that right that time?
Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay. I see words as I say them, and so that one stops me. But I mean, her last shot sits on the front of the rim, doesn't fall, and it was like, that was the game. I mean, that was the the game in one shot, that the story of that game in one shot. That's a shot that it seems like she makes 101% of the time.
Oh my God.
And it just didn't have enough on it by, just a little bit more. It goes in, and I think they win the game and on to Greensboro. And what a story that would have been, Iowa against Iowa State in the Sweet 16. It's just one of those things that you don't think you're going to see, but that would have been something else.
Could have been the story of the year in the state, sports story of the year. I mean, that would have been all time. I mean, we've gotten some amazing Cyhawk games the last few years, football wise, with a lot of hype, men's basketball, but I think that could have been another level. I mean, that would have been a national story and a season defining story. And it's just to think about how close we were to getting that is, oh man. I saw Sonato get that position, and I was mentally ready for overtime when she just getting the position she got in the lane. I was like, that's a basket. It was just a day where the shots didn't fall, and that, I mean, I don't know how much Creighton had to do with that, but and credit to them for coming up with a game plan to at least limit Iowa offensively.
Yeah, and Kate and Clark showed that everybody has days like those.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 for 19. Tough. The only thing, if you're Iowa, you can hope for is that it makes her angry, and she plays with enough fury as it is, but make her angry for an entire calendar year, and I wonder what she can do.
She's an unbelievable competitor, and I think losses like that the disappointment obviously fades over time, but I have a feeling going into next year that she's still going to be thinking about that one.
Okay, let's do the men, and I'm sorry, as everybody knows, the tale is not any happier. In some regards, it may be even more unhappy, because it seemed like you had a team that was poised, not a lock, but poised to finally get to that second week of the NCAA tournament. And there were a lot of people around the country who thought even bigger for them. And they went out against Richmond and played poorly and lost to what I consider an inferior team. And it was just, it told such a story about what March basketball can be like, because you go from one of the highest highs that they've had, I would say the highest high that they've had in 15 years, and under Fran McCaffrey for sure, to the lowest low in the space of 4 days. You'd rather have the high at the end instead of the low. But I mean, to me, there were a lot of reasons they didn't win that game, but they couldn't shoot.
No, and it's like you said, it was a similar story to the women. They couldn't shoot. 6 for 29 from three, 20.6%, one of the worst of the year. And everybody besides Patrick McCaffrey was 2 for 22. So that, I mean, if it wasn't for him, it would have been even worse. And it was the same kind of story. Once the shots didn't fall, they didn't have another answer. They didn't get to the free throw line enough. I think they were 9 for 12. And the turnover percentage too was a problem. They had a similar turnover percentage against Richmond that they did against Rutgers. And that was one of their strengths all year, was not turning the ball over. And they turned it over too many times in both those two games. But against Rutgers, they got to the free throw line 27 times. And against Richmond, they got to the line 12 times. And so once the shots weren't falling, they were turning it over too much. And then I don't want to say they panicked, because it really didn't look like they were, completely overwhelmed or anything, but it was almost like they just didn't know what else to do when the shots weren't going down.
Yeah, I sat courtside, and it was the Iowa basket in the second half, and I was just, it's like, this wasn't the team I saw in Indianapolis. There was no penetration. Richmond's defensive game plan and execution for that game, flawless. Keegan Murray, I hadn't seen him that frustrated offensively. I know he had 21 points, but he went 15 minutes without a field goal attempt at one stretch. And I hadn't seen him that stymied in a lot of games. For whatever Richmond lacked, it made up for in preparation and execution. And I thought their forward, Burton, outplayed Murray and got the best of him when the Spiders had the ball. So it wasn't a great showcase for Murray, who, it was like so many superstar players, lottery picks projected, are still playing in this tournament. And he's not, and it's too bad, because we all saw him over and over and over again and know how good he is. And when it was time to really be that guy, it just wasn't quite there.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, during that stretch where he didn't have a field goal for a long time, the TV broadcast was like imploring Iowa to just get him the ball. They're like, this is where you need to get your best player, your All-American, the ball. And I agree, but at the same time, there's been a lot of moments throughout the season where I don't think that's always, he's not a guy that just demands the ball and goes one-on-one to score. I mean, he kind of works within the flow of the offense. He comes off screens, gets open shots, gets offensive rebounds, gets out in transition. And Richmond just didn't let him do that. I mean, there was always guys covering him, denying him passes. They did a good job rebounding too. Richmond did. Just didn't let him get those shots that, got him in rhythm. And like you said, he still scored 21 points. It's not like he's the reason they lost the game. That's a lot to ask out of anybody. And so you can't blame him for losing that game. There's plenty of other guys that didn't play well either. But that was just one factor in it. And I don't think he made a three either. Yeah. He didn't make one against Rutgers, and still played pretty well. So, but it was just, they needed an answer and nobody could give him one.
And they couldn't do anything with the Richmond point guard.
Yeah.
He was the player of the game. He played a beautiful game. And then against Providence on Saturday, he couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
The whole team couldn't do anything. So that's, that doesn't help matters around here much either, when in the second round they got buried by Providence. But I don't know. I think as time fades, the NCAA game, it's never going to be forgotten, but you got to remember the positive with the negative. And I'm not a Pollyanna, but I also know what I saw over the course of a couple of months. And I saw Iowa beat a lot of good teams. I saw Iowa go from 4-6 and foundering in the Big Ten to 12-8. Big win on the road against Michigan. Big win on the road against Ohio State. Michigan's still playing. Ohio State was a second-round NCAA team. They clobbered Michigan State and Carver, just tore them apart. And then the Big Ten tournament, 4, memorable games in different ways. The Northwestern game for being an absolute, as close to perfection as it gets. Rutgers for starting out down 10 and then, just gradually dominating. The incredible finish against Indiana in a tense, tight, you could not get sucked up in that game, I don't think. And then Purdue, which I still think is the best team in the conference. Iowa outplayed Purdue in a championship game. And Keegan Murray was a better player than Jaden Ivey in that game. I thought Iowa did a great job on Ivey. So this is a team that has a long list of accomplishments this season. This is how much is placed on the NCAA tournament, which can be a fluky, weird deal. And draws do matter. And I'm not saying Richmond was a bad draw, but there were probably 12 seeds, 12 seeds that Iowa might have fared better against. I don't know. But Iowa comes out and didn't have the look it had in Indianapolis. And this was a thing I talked to colleagues about the night before. It's a different animal. It's not a conference tournament. The stands aren't packed. You're in Buffalo on a Thursday afternoon. The place is half empty. Most people don't even have rooting interests. You got to make your own energy, and you're playing against competent, smart, talented teams who, in Richmond's case, a 12 seed's looser, less to lose. And the longer the game goes and the more they're in it, the more their confidence grows, and the favorite, feels that pressure. And I think I normally don't put all too much stock in that, but I do think it affected this game. I mean, Iowa's body language was not good in that game. Richmond's was very good. And I think it was reflected in the way they played.
Yeah. And there was a lot of talk too about Iowa just coming off of 4 games in 4 days, and not 4, but 3 intense games, and having that quick turnaround to Thursday afternoon in Buffalo. I don't know if that made that
Richmond had the same thing.
Exactly. And it was, I think it was more of that. Just you go from playing in the Big Ten, packed arenas every night, except for a couple places, and then Big Ten tournament, very clear goal right in front of you, teams to a completely new opponent, one that's really, really motivated, nothing to lose for them, a team that's had a few days to game plan for you.
And a veteran team.
Yeah. And
I mean, these teams in this tournament, there are some old teams, and Richmond's an old team.
Yeah. And one that prides itself on defense too. I mean, like Gilliard's like the all-time leader in steals, I think. Yeah. And part of that's because he's played a ton, but still they take a lot of pride in defense. And
they average 3 steals a game.
Yeah.
I don't care how old you are, how many games you played. That's a bunch.
That's a lot. Yeah. So, I mean, they were ready to give Iowa something that they hadn't seen in a while. And it is on Iowa to kind of create your own energy in an environment like that. And you're right. It just didn't really come.
Yeah. And there is an element of snobbery involved. The Big Ten should know way more than well by now. There's good teams every place. Illinois is out in the second round for the second year in a row. Indiana got smashed by St. Mary's. You can go down the line. These are good teams. St. Peter's is a good team. I don't think they give Purdue a game at all, but they're good. I'm not saying they're great, but it's a deal where I don't care who you are or where you're playing them. If you're playing a good team and you're not good, you're going to pay.
Yeah. What do you make of the sort of the Big Ten storyline that it kind of comes across every March because they haven't won a national title in forever. But I think the last 2 years, particularly last year, obviously, it was just Big Ten is the best conference in the country all year long. It was 3-4 top 10 teams, and none of them live up to expectations. This year, I'm like, okay, they're seed wise, they were supposed to have 2 Sweet 16 teams, and they had 2 Sweet 16 teams. So I think some of it's a little bit overblown, but you do kind of, I think a lot of it is just the talk all year from, I don't know if Big Ten teams do it as much as just the media in general talks up Big Ten teams.
Well, you ask any coach, they'll tell you it's the best league in the country, True. But I think a simple answer is guard play. The Big Ten just didn't have a lot of great guards this year. And, it's the old cliche in the tournament that guards dictate. Iowa didn't have an answer for Jacob Gilliard of Richmond.
Yeah.
Illinois' guard situation, I don't know what happened over there, but it wasn't right. Things never it wasn't good against Indiana in the Big Ten tournament. I watched that game at courtside, and then the Houston game, I mean, Curbelo suddenly became missing in action.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I didn't think Ohio State's guards were anything special. Nor Indiana's. Michigan's getting good guard play, especially from a freshman named Frankie Collins has come along and done a great job when they needed him to. But Michigan State, their guards, I'm not up to their usual standard, in my opinion. And Wisconsin, Johnny Davis wasn't himself physically in the tournament.
No. And then they lost Hepburn too against Iowa State. That made a big difference.
Well, that could lead us into the next subject, which is happier things. Iowa State. They're still playing. That would have been a good bet to make a week ago, them in the Sweet 16. It's easy in hindsight to see how it's happened, but a week ago, I didn't see how they were going to get past Wisconsin in Milwaukee, let alone, LSU I thought was hard enough.
Right. Yeah, it was fun. It's funny because when you just watch the selection show live, and a couple of quick thoughts jumped out at me. Is like, okay, Iowa State's first game is against a team that just fired its coach. That's a great draw if you're an 11 seed. And then your 3 seed, Wisconsin, is a team that the metrics say is kind of overrated and and their star player has been hobbled in the last couple of weeks. So I'm like, that's pretty good. But then you sit back and you think about the way Iowa State had been playing, lost by 30 to Texas Tech, had scored in the 30s against Oklahoma State, I think. And you look at the type of team LSU was, the type of environment Wisconsin would have had. And suddenly I was like, okay, maybe it's a pretty good draw if you're an 11 seed, but I still want to predict a Sweet 16 team. But Iowa State they all season, they just have not given up that defensive identity. I mean, they just smother teams. And the last couple of games, they got enough from Tyrese Hunter against LSU, and then they got enough from Gabe Kalsher against Wisconsin to win. So, it's not the most pleasing thing to watch if you love offensive basketball, but you don't make excuses this time of year for advancing.
No, I see this as probably going to be one of the least of Otzelberger's teams over there.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, 22 wins in a Sweet 16, cobbled together on, he's got 2 reliable scorers and maybe really only one. Hunter had the magnificent game Friday. One of the great games in Iowa State NCAA history, making 7 threes. Okay, he's 1 of 10 Sunday. I still think he played a good game with what he did all around.
Yeah. But
Gabe Kalsher gives him nothing offensively on Friday, and Sunday he puts them on their back with one of his best games of his career. They only have those 2 guys and Isaiah Brockington as scorers. They can get occasional points from Grill and Kuntz, but they're not going to give you 15 or 20. Generally, I know they both have very limited options, very limited offense. They don't get anything from the post, but the way they defended, they had 15 steals against LSU, a long athletic team. Against Wisconsin, Wisconsin leads the nation in fewest turnovers per game. Wisconsin turns it over 17 times. It was great defense for 40 minutes. And that can get you places you aren't supposed to go. Now, does this continue? I'm not going to say no. But I also look at who they beat, and you went over this. Yeah, to me, LSU was coachless, but I looked at it as players don't care.
Yeah.
Big moment. They don't care. It's about them anyway. And they were stymied. Wisconsin comes in and it's got problems, maybe bubbling under the surface, but Johnny Davis wasn't the player he was in becoming Big Ten Player of the Year. He hurt himself against Nebraska in the last regular season game. Didn't have his lift. And they keyed on him, and they did a beautiful job of putting two guys on him and denying him a whole lot of what he likes to do. And then Hepburn goes down, and I thought that killed Wisconsin, because you got to put Davison at the point, and Davison's a good player. But all of a sudden, as I was watching this, I told my wife, I said, Davison's got too much to deal with now, and it's going to affect him.
Mm-hmm.
And for once, I was right about something. He was not his normally effective self, and things were completely out of sync for them. And Iowa State had a lot to do with that. You know, there were a lot of teams that would have been in that game playing Wisconsin and Milwaukee with Davis on the court and would have lost to them. And Iowa State never let Wisconsin get comfortable once that entire game.
So Wisconsin going 2 for 22 from three, worst of the season, and Iowa State ranking 8th in the country in 3-point field goal defense. There's some debate about how much defenses can actually affect 3-point field goal defense, but Iowa State also ranks 4th in the country in turnover percentage. It's pretty clear that they disrupt teams offensively. And so even after Hepburn went down, or even before Hepburn went down, Wisconsin was having issues. And I think Iowa State had a lot to do with that.
No, there's no question. I mean, and it's been a constant, even, you know, late in the year when they sputtered. It wasn't the defense that was killing them. It was, I mean, they were brutal on offense. You alluded to the two games in particular. The home finale against Oklahoma State, 36 points. I didn't see the game, but when I saw the score, it's like, how is that an NCAA tournament team?
Yeah.
They go to Baylor and they competed, which surprised me, I admit. And then they go to Kansas City against Texas Tech, which is an excellent team probably just as capable of winning the national title as anybody. But they score 41 and just get blown out of Kansas City. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's an NCAA tournament team. Are they just out of teams? But then comes the draw, as we've gone over, and they do have a body of work. You know, I mean, look, they have beaten a lot of good teams this season. They just have. So, and you judge these teams on their 32, 33, 34 games, not on 3 or 4 or 5. And Iowa State clearly fit the bill, but for the NCAA committee, weren't even in one of the, first 4 games. And they get there and they don't flinch. I mean, they did not flinch. The moment wasn't too big for these guys, some of them who haven't been there, and one of them is a freshman point guard. So I don't care what happens against Miami, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It has been an unbelievably successful season. And I know the storyline is 2-22 last year, and now they've won 22 this year. But that they could be competitive this year was a big thing. They've been more than competitive. And getting to the Sweet 16, you'll never be able to take that away from them. And until it's proven otherwise, they could win again Friday.
Yeah, it's impressive. I mean, I think they won 7 games this year when they scored fewer than 0.95 points per possession, which is not good. And that Texas Tech was one of them. They had beaten TCU doing that. And then Wisconsin and LSU so they beat really good teams when they weren't playing well offensively. And that it's interesting to me that I wonder, coming into this NCAA tournament for a team like that, if it was almost a little bit of new life, because all of a sudden you're out of that Big 12 grind where you play everybody twice, and within a tight, they don't play conference games in December. Those teams figured out a way to beat Iowa State. Those are all really good teams. I went to the Iowa State game against Kansas State when they were struggling. They went up in that game 10-0 and blew a double-digit lead and lost in overtime against a Kansas State team that didn't make it to the NCAA tournament. But that was a good Kansas State team. Nigel Pack, their guard, is an outstanding scorer. And I just feel like part of it is just getting out of that Big 12 grind where you're not all of a sudden you're playing completely different teams that have not gone up against a team like that, haven't played you before, that haven't played as many defenses like you before, and you can just go out there and defend and target their best players and play hard, play motivated, and have a little bit of new life. And I think we saw some of that. Just it was nice to just be able to see some different teams and defend and get a couple of guys hot enough to win the game. And hey, it's kind of a Big Ten team there. You got a Minnesota transfer, a Penn State transfer, a Wisconsin kid. I mean, it's kind of funny if we talk about the Big Ten guards, and Iowa State found a couple, and it's been an amazing fit.
Yeah, and Iowa State, to support what you just said, has not lost against a team that's not from the Big 12.
Yeah.
I mean, they've beaten Memphis, they've beaten Xavier, they've beaten Wisconsin, LSU.
Iowa.
They beat the hell out of Iowa. If it's not a Big 12 team, Iowa State can't lose. They're 7. They played Big 12 teams 19 times and won 7. But it is a pretty good league. I mean,
they're cheering for Providence.
Yeah, right. I mean, TCU, so close to beating Arizona. Baylor's the one that fell, which is the surprise, of course. Well, in Texas too, in the second round. But Texas Tech is so good.
Mm.
And that TCU team, when I saw them before the tournament, I thought they're good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's amazing how that conference grind is so different than the NCAA tournament. Of course, depending on who you draw, but everybody, I think, was pretty much in agreement the Big 12 had the best top to bottom league this year.
Yeah.
So it stands to figure that Iowa State's going to feel like it's getting a bit of a reprieve. And now we've got Miami against the Cyclones on Friday. And I'm not a student of this Miami team. I didn't get to see much of their game against Auburn. And I don't watch a lot of Miami Hurricanes basketball as a rule. But they must be pretty good.
Yeah, they've got it's another one of those old teams. I mean, a lot of experience. They've got a guy, Charlie Moore, who's in like his 7th year of college basketball. He's been to Cal, DePaul. I think I'm even forgetting one. Kansas, yeah. And now he's at Miami. And he's from Chicago. What a story that is. I wonder if I think that might be mentioned a time or two on the TV broadcast Friday. But then they've got other guards too, McGusty, Wong. They gave Auburn a ton of trouble. I mean, Auburn that was a weird team, Auburn, that was ranked number 1 at one point, but just never really lived up to that. But I mean, Miami from the start just kind of blew them out. Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith, the NBA like hyped draft pick, he kind of struggled a little bit, but I think it was kind of down to the guard play, and Miami was just swarming. I didn't really know what to think of them because the ACC seemed pretty down this year, but they beat Duke. And that says a lot to me. At Duke. And then they have Austin.
Duke's average starters, the age of their average starters, 19.
Yeah.
The average age of the Miami starter is 22.8. You know, they have 4 sixth-year seniors in their rotation. That spells trouble, in my opinion. I mean, you're seeing old teams do pretty well.
Yeah, you are.
This is an old team. Oh my gosh. I mean, you'll see younger NBA. The Pistons lineup isn't 22.8 years old average.
I think some of them might be pushing Jim Larinaga.
Another thing. This guy's 72. I mean, I guess he gets naps every afternoon. I'm not saying that to degrade him. It's just that they've got the stability, and he also apparently knows how to work the transfer portal like so many coaches do these days. But I mean, they were 14-6 in the ACC. And I don't care if the ACC's down or not. You go 14-6 in that league, you got to be pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't like you. I haven't watched them much, but I did watch quite a bit of that Duke game, and they're just fearless players. I mean, what you would expect from a veteran team that I think a lot of those guys know it's kind of their last hurrah and they're looking to make the most of it. And it's, I mean, two pretty good stories here with Miami and Iowa State. Both you got a first year coach, and then well, not a first year head coach, but a first year coach at Iowa State, and then a guy that's been to the Final Four with a mid major and has been around for a while with Miami. Both working the transfer portal, both meshing some older players with some younger players, and then two teams, at least definitely Miami, that you don't think of as a college basketball powerhouse. I mean, Iowa State has definitely had its moments, but it's quite an interesting matchup. I think one that nationally it's going to be way down the list on what people are excited for and what people are going to be talking about. But it's intriguing and interesting, and I think both those teams are excited about the chance that they have, because I mean, it's kind of like when Oregon State played Oklahoma State last year, and you're like, one of these teams is going to be in the Elite Eight, a win away from the Final Four. And for either of those, that's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's a game that's going to start about 10 o'clock at night in Miami, which is just, I don't know. It seems absurd to me, but they know every right button to push when it comes to getting the most out of their advertising dollars. And
yeah,
so that's on them. But I mean, as far as a matchup, I don't know. I think that, strangely enough, even though Iowa State played a 6 seed and a 3 seed, I think this 10 seed will be the best of the 3 teams they played in this tournament.
Yeah, I agree. After watching them play Auburn, and that didn't look like a 10 seed, and they handled USC too, which I thought USC was a little bit overrated, but still, I mean, it's a team that I think has a lot more offensive options. I mean, I might not have said that with a 100% healthy Wisconsin, but otherwise, I think it is going to give Iowa State a little bit more of a challenge. And then at some point, if you're Iowa State, you're hoping that you get enough offense too. I mean, at any point that could run out and everybody could go cold, like has happened multiple times before. So
yeah,
you're kind of hoping for that too.
I think it's got to be Brockington's turn. I mean, they rode Hunter Friday, they rode Kelcher Sunday, and Brockington certainly did a nice job up there in Milwaukee. But I think it could be a matter of he's got to be really big.
Yeah.
Miami's got 4 guys that are good for 10 points a game. Iowa State doesn't. So Brockington's going to have a lot on his shoulders late in the evening Friday in United Center.
Yep, I agree. I mean, they were trying to get him involved a lot in both those games, and he hit a couple of big shots, but yeah, he's got to go and be the guy in this game.
We got one more team. The Iowa State women are still playing, and to me, it looks like they got a pretty open path to the Elite Eight.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize that you say that, and it sounds like you're knocking Creighton. But Creighton is like, I don't know what they are, 500 to 1 right now to win the national championship. I'm sorry, I don't make those odds. I just think that if Iowa State plays a decent game, it wins.
Yeah, I watched them against UT Arlington in the first round, and I don't know what happened there, but they were close to losing that game. But then it was almost like they got their clunker out of the way in the first round and still won, because against Georgia, they dominated from the start. A Georgia team that's been played some really good teams in the SEC, been ranked in the top 25 all year, and Iowa State just had it going. I mean, they have a lot of options too. I mean, Creighton's probably looking at a pretty similar game plan where you're trying to shut down Ashley Jones, but there's shooters all over the floor for Iowa State. So you can't just lock down one player. You're just kind of hoping that everybody else goes cold. But I agree with you. I think Iowa State, just like we expected Iowa to kind of roll Creighton, I think Iowa State has to be feeling pretty good right now. Obviously they're not going to take Creighton lightly watching what just happened, but it's it's just too bad that the men and the women are playing at the same time because
It's insane. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get that. There has to be some way. I don't care who the school is. There's got to be some way you can avoid that.
yeah, and it's like it's the I mean it's the TV networks that are choosing this, and it's you've got CBS Turner doing the men and ESPN doing the women, and I guess they're not really working together because I don't know. I assume that ESPN just wanted South Carolina in the first time slot because that's a big draw there, and then they wanted Stanford in the late night time zone. I guess I don't know. And then like I said, the men's draw. I mean, Iowa State Miami is going to be low on their picks, so I guess they just didn't really care. Is what it comes down to.
That's just it. They don't really care. I mean, I know it sounds simple-minded, but I mean, that's not a priority for them. The priority is to put the best games in the best slots, and it's still lousy. And you would think that the NCAA would have something to say, but it's like don't have men's and women's teams from the same school butting heads. But the TV money is way too big to counter that argument.
Yeah, it's
like, no, here, take a look at your paycheck again and then go away.
Yeah,
so, I get it, but it's just it strikes me as wrong, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be a right. So
and there's been a lot of, I mean, that's been a big storyline is sort of the equity between the men's and the women's the lack of it between the men's and the women's tournaments over the last couple of years. And I think the women's tournament used to be like a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, at least for the first two rounds. Maybe it wasn't for the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight because of the quick turnaround for the Final Four. But I mean,
they had more of their own time slots and nights. I don't know why that's changed, but it has.
Because the second day of Sweet 16 games for women start at like 10:30 a.m. because that's a Saturday. And so you get those games, you get the women's games first and then just stay out of the prime time for the men's Elite Eight games. I don't know.
If they beat Creighton, they'll play, we presume, South Carolina, but it's no lock. They play North Carolina, which is capable, and it's in North Carolina.
They've got an Iowa too, North Carolina.
Well, the South Carolina team is like even money to win the whole thing. So, I mean, that tells you all you need to know about what Iowa State would be facing.
Yeah. And it's, like I said, they've been holding teams to like 30 points a game. And this is where, I mean, Iowa and Iowa State have both gotten into these situations in the women's tournament where they've had really good teams advance pretty far, and then you just run into a UConn, Baylor, NC State. Well, I guess Iowa beat NC State a couple of years ago, but you know what I mean? Once you get into those really, really elite teams, it takes a lot. And so you just feel
but that's what you want. You want that chance.
Yeah. You're happy to get there and have a chance. And it is too bad that they got put in the South Carolina region because I think some of the other one seeds are more gettable. But hey, you never know. It's going to be it's probably going to be a pretty low scoring game, and that's a chance to make an impact. It's not like you're going to lose by like 30. Yeah,
and the Elite Eight's pretty rarefied air for an definitely. Iowa State or an Iowa.
Yeah, that's something to celebrate, no matter what.
Well, I think we covered the waterfront here. I guess I don't anticipate doing another of these this season, but who is your pick for the men?
My initial pick was Gonzaga over Arizona, and so I think I'm going to stick with that. But I don't know. I think it's pretty open. Gonzaga is not the Gonzaga they were last year, and they didn't even win it last year. So that's where I'm at right now. What about you?
I'm going to take Texas Tech.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I kind of like them. I like that their coach left for Texas and they're still playing, and Texas is on the wayside. They're just tough as nails. But I can see a half dozen different winners.
yeah.
I mean, I can see, even though it's a Big Ten team, I can see Purdue winning it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't bet a nickel on it, but I wouldn't call it the upset of my lifetime either.
Yeah.
And the Zags obviously have, just great talent. I mean, a Kansas or a Providence, whoever comes out of that game, I think is good enough to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's not like the women with South Carolina. This thing is genuinely up for grabs.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any?
St. Peter's? That's your.
I was going to ask you about no respect to the Peacocks. I mean, come on.
Well, I love them. I love them. I love that somebody did what they did. They play they have an enrollment of like 2,100 students. You can go right by their campus and not know there's a college there. Their gym, it's not an arena, it's a gym, is called Run Baby Run Arena. It's just beautiful. It is beautiful. And it'd be one of the greatest things in the history of sports. Sorry, Purdue, if St. Peter's won that game.
Oh my God. Can you imagine?
People would levitate all over New Jersey and beyond.
Purdue is Purdue, I mean, we talked about, there's a lot of talk about Illinois and Wisconsin and even Iowa kind of missing out on some opportunities with some generational players these last few years, not going very far in the tournament. Purdue is desperate to get to the Final Four, and now it's kind of set up for them. And can you imagine if it was St. Peter's then? Oh
I can't. Purdue went to the Final Four the last time. Iowa went to the Final Four.
Yeah.
1980. We were all younger then.
Oh my God. What do you think about my last question for you? What do you think about the National Player of the Year races? Do you care? Do you have strong opinions about?
I think the Kentucky guy is going to win most of them. Just because I think people look at 15 rebounds a game and are wowed.
Yeah.
And they finish strong when some of these things have already been voted on.
Right.
That was good. But to me, there isn't the clear-cut choice. Before the NCAA tournament, I would have told you Keegan Murray's as good as any player in the country.
Mm.
And I firmly believe that. I've never seen an Iowa player like that. And I will go as far as to say that includes Ronnie Lester.
Wow.
Because of the ease and the 3-level scoring that he did all season long. So many times he would score 8 points in a minute and 20 seconds or something like that. So many times he would turn a 2-point game into a 10-point game. And a well-rounded player. I mean, his rebound numbers were good. His 3-point shooting was much better than I think anybody would have had any reason to expect. He's a shot blocker. He's second on the team in steals, and just a winner. And I just thought that it was almost too bad that Iowa didn't draw better at home than it did, because a lot of people missed out on seeing this guy, and they're not going to get a chance.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm glad that the women's team started selling out at the end there. But yeah, the men. I went to the first Big Ten home game in January against Maryland. That place was half empty.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard to believe. There was just no environment, and it is too bad. But I don't know what. That's another podcast, probably.
Yeah, it is, and it's discussed to death, and nothing changes.
Yeah, it's every single year it comes up. It's a storyline, and there's a million ideas, and it doesn't change.
Yeah, strange. All right. Well, hey, I tell you what. If Iowa State wins 2 games and is in the Final Four next week, then we'll figure something out.
That's
for,
a podcast.
For this website.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for watching, listening, etc.